keynote speaker, Dr. Martin Kutcher, focuses on pediatric behavior neurology. He will explain the effects of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder throughout childhood, adolescence, and adult life. Dr. Kutcher has researched extensively and written several enlightening books. One that fascinates me, Organizing the Disorganized Child, because I asked him, how about a book on organizing the disorganized adult, like myself? And he said it's already been written. I want to acknowledge with thanks the sponsors of tonight's sessions, the Center for Adolescent Research and Development, Dr. Swartz. Let's give Dr. Swartz a round of applause for all of his work. I see he has a fan club over there. And also Dr. Spielhagen, who is on sabbatical this year and unable to be with us. And also the Center on Aging and Policy. Again, a round of applause for Dr. Force. Let's give Dr. Force a round of applause. And Dr. Kahana, who's sitting we're going to ask him to stand up now. Let's acknowledge Dr. Kahana. And also the Kaplan Family Foundations. We're all very grateful. I think many of you see Kaplan, the Kaplan name around the campus, and we are very grateful to the Kaplan Family Foundations. These centers provide many opportunities for all of us to expand knowledge in psychological, social, cultural, educational, and health-related issues. And so thank you all for joining us in this exploration of ADHD across the lifespan. And again, I guess I turn it back over to Dr. Force. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Cutting. This is all nice, and we're very happy you're here. And there's been a lot of work put into this, and the support of our students, the Psych-High students, the Aging United students. But that woman in the back, Kathleen McCoy, if you could just turn around, none of us would be sitting here if it wasn't for her. So thank you very, very much. And Paul, if you'd introduce Marty.
Yeah, sure. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Martin Kutcher, has an extensive biography, which I won't go through for brevity, because it is, as Kevin gave us a warm welcome, it is a little warm in here. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Martin Kutcher.
Well, thank you. With an audience like this and introductions like that, I can't wait to hear what I had to say. So, we have a simple task just to talk about everything about ADD if you'd ever want to know about any age in 45 minutes. And this is the overview. First we're going to talk about ADHD and redefine it as to include executive function. Just a quick show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the concept of executive function? So some good, and plenty still need to learn. Okay. Then we're going to talk very briefly, just mention the co-occurring problems of, that I call part of the syndrome mix, because ADHD rarely goes along by itself. Then these kids also have to deal with family problems, some of which they've caused. Then we'll talk about 4 rules of treatment. Keep it positive, keep it calm, keep it organized, and the hardest to do, keep doing rules 1 through 3. And I'm just going to mention very briefly at the end about medication. So this is the traditional, boring DSM-4 diagnostic categorization of ADHD, a triad of inattention plus or minus hyperactivity and impulsivity. I hate these criteria. We're stuck with them. They really trivialize the condition. It's as if all you had to do was come by and tap the kid on the shoulder every 5 minutes, and they said, "Oh, thanks, Mom, for coming back. Could you come back in 10 minutes and make sure I'm still on task? Or make it 5 minutes. I really appreciate it. I love you when you come by and remind me to get back to work." If that was the case, we wouldn't all be here. Although I hate the criteria, we are stuck with them, and there are some useful things about it. First of all, these are the symptoms of the inattentive type. There are 9 of them, you need 6. I've simplified the wording, but I've taken out none of the details. So the first thing I want you to notice is they're not very specific. They just say fails to pay close attention. Who says the kid fails to pay close attention? It's some teacher or parent. Okay, or as the child gets older, they may recognize it themselves. But I'm tired of people saying, well, we're just the teacher, we're just the parent. We don't know anything. I don't stand on the street corners and pull kids randomly in off the street to test them. They're all sent to me because somebody has noticed that this one, compared to everyone else in the classroom, is having trouble paying attention. The other thing you'll notice is that they're no longer in alphabetical order. The italics are mine. 5 of them are purely organizational. And this is what really trips up the college kids, okay? Because they lose their mother nagging them at the same time as the professors pull back. And you're supposed to advocate for yourself totally. and execute the plan totally on your own with no one supervising you for the first time. Difficulty organizing tasks, fails to follow through, avoids tasks requiring sustained motivation, loses things needed for tasks, forgetful in daily activities. If you're really disorganized, and I mean really disorganized, you're already 5/6 of the way to a diagnosis of ADHD. Put another way, you can't really be ADHD, you can't get 6 symptoms unless you at least dip into some of the disorganized things. So one of the big clues to ADHD kids and adults is that they have to work really hard at trying to be organized. These are what I call the also-ran symptoms, hyperactivity and impulsivity. The hyperactivity is annoying to the teacher, okay, but it's not really what's the problem. DSM-4, how many of you are familiar with DSM-4? Okay, good. DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. It's the official Bible that you need in order to make official diagnoses. And they have 3 recognized types of ADHD. There's the predominantly inattentive type, the Space Cadet girl. Okay, the predominantly hyperactive impulsive type, that's rare. The kid who's running around doing 5 things at once but paying attention, that's kind of hard to understand. And then the most common, the combined type. ADHD is not just American. Okay, if you apply these criteria around the world, we come out pretty much average. Okay, it's recognized more in the United States. It's treated more perhaps in the United States. Okay, but it's not an American condition. So if we were to flesh out these criteria, you know what, let's skip these in the interest of time. The major point of what I want to say is that if you're just talking with your doctor or just considering this triad of inattention, plus or minus hyperactivity, impulsivity, the odds are they're just hitting the tip of the iceberg. There are a whole host of other executive function problems like inhibition, initiation, self-talk, working memory. We're going to talk about those in some detail. Co-occurring conditions, learning disabilities, oppositional defiant, anxiety, depression, bipolar, Tourette's, Asperger's, sensory integration, central auditory. Okay, the odds are 80% that you have at least one of these other conditions. And then family issues that the child has to deal with. One of my books called Kids in the Syndrome Mix, and my wife and I were trying to come up with titles, which is harder than you might think for a book. And my wife came up with one, what did you think would happen when you married his father? But we decided that would alienate half the audience, so we went with another title. So it's kind of like the psychiatry hotline. Hi, you've reached the psychiatry hotline. If you have OCD, please keep pressing number 2. If you have schizophrenia, press 2 and 5. If you're paranoid, don't bother pressing anything. We already know where you live. If you're depressed, don't bother pressing anything either. We're not going to pick up anyhow. And if you have ADHD, press the shiniest button. So this is a new concept, about 2 decades. Not really new, but it's been slow to get into the official information. Okay, ADHD is not so much a problem about short attention span. It's a problem with inhibition, putting brakes, which is why I entitled one of my books called ADHD Living Without Brakes. The theory goes as follows, that the frontal lobes are the home, and the prefrontal lobes are the home of our executive function and braking centers. And these are asleep on the job in ADHD people. So therefore, ADHD people show executive dysfunction and brakeless behaviors. And if you think about a lot of kids and view them as brakeless, rather than merely inattentive, it paints a much broader picture. You know, if the child snaps back at his mother, okay, what does that have to do with the short attention span? But it has a lot to do with being brakeless. And if the reasoning goes that there's too little norepinephrine and dopamine, 2 biochemicals, coming to and from the frontal lobes, which are the home of our brakes. One of my favorite sayings since I was in high school has been, the human brain is a bunch of chemicals with illusions of grandeur. So it comes as a shock to some people that so much of what we do and think and feel is controlled by our biochemistry. This is a real condition. No matter how you study it, functional MRIs, PET scans, glucose studies, EEGs, they all show statistical differences in the frontal and prefrontal lobes of ADHD people. Now, having said that, don't go to your doctor and ask for a PET scan to diagnose your ADHD. It's not necessary, and it's not accurate enough on an individual. Twin studies show that genetic factors control up to 75 to 97% of a person's risk for having ADHD. It's not parenting that caused this, okay? Parenting has a lot to do perhaps with the outcome, but not in terms of the etiology and cause. So this is an attempt I commissioned for one of my books of a child with ADHD trying to put on the brakes and nothing much is happening. My wife looked at it and said, "That's disgusting, you're not using it." But I paid $500 to have it done, so someone's going to look at it. Okay, so this is a new definition of ADHD, the inability to inhibit the present with an eye to the future. Okay, which is why my first book was called ADHD Living Right Now. If you remember nothing else from this entire talk, remember the following 2 slides. This is what Jack sees. Jack presumably has ADHD. He's overwhelmed by the wiggling fish. There's nothing evil about Jack, there's nothing lazy about Jack, there's nothing bad about Jack, there's nothing non-caring about Jack. But he's overwhelmed by the wiggling fish. That's all he can see, that's all that exists in his universe. Okay, there's a video game in front of him, that's all he can see. This is what everyone else seems to notice. Okay. It's not that Jack doesn't care about the cliff. He doesn't like blood, he doesn't like broken bones, especially not his own. Okay? But what he can't do is keep it in mind. He's so overwhelmed, unable to put brakes on the present, that he can't see the future. So overwhelmed by the desire to go out and have fun tonight, or to play the video game, that he can't see that he's got finals coming up in 2 weeks. And then not only that, but he's got that paper that's been hanging over his head for the last 3 months, which he thought was easy to do, because it only takes 2 weeks, but forgot that that was 2 weeks, but also midterms. So these are the executive functions which we're going to spend a few moments talking about. Inhibition. That's, in my mind, the most important executive function, especially in ADHD. The ability to inhibit behavior is a nice thing all by itself. Someone cuts you off, it's nice to be able to not curse at the person, not get out of the car, pull out a knife, and get revenge. It's nice to be able to inhibit your reaction, okay? So that's nice all in itself. But also, if you don't get to inhibit your behavior long enough, you never get to use any of your other executive functions either. So once the ability to inhibit goes out the window, all your other executive functions go out the window. So ADHD kids are like moths, okay? It's not that they can't pay attention. They can't stop paying attention to what's fascinating. They'll be like moths to a bright light. As long as you let a bright light, that's where they'll be. The teacher's job is to be more fascinating than the paperclip. Okay. Rarely will the bright light be algebra homework. Of course, it will be your psychology homework, though. Okay. This is one test that psychologists like to use for inhibition. It's called the Stroop test. Okay. And the goal is that you have to look at the word and say its color, red, not blue. So you have to inhibit your first, we're so used to reading that our first response is just to read green. And okay, but instead you're supposed to say blue. So in theory, people with ADHD would have trouble doing this. Red, blue, green, purple. Okay. Now, just because you may be having trouble doing this doesn't mean that you have to go see the doctor for ADHD diagnosis. The CEO, the Chief Executive Officer. Inside your brain is just there's blobs of neurons. There's no little person inside looking out through periscope eyes. Okay. By the way, this perfect image that you see right now is all virtual reality. There is no such image inside your brain. It's just it's like a videotape playing without a TV on. Okay. There's nobody in charge inside there. There's just 10 billion neurons all talking to each other all at once. The frontal lobes are the parts of the brain that like to think they're in charge, but the rest of the brain hasn't ceded the control totally over to them. Self-talk. Toddlers use it in nursery school. You can hear them say, "We use words here." All right. If you think about someone who's done something really stupid, and you ask them, what were they thinking when you did that? What were you thinking when you threw that rock off the bridge onto the car below? What were you thinking, Johnny? What do they always say? I don't know. Guess what? They're telling you the truth. They weren't thinking. How could a nice kid grows up with nice values do something as stupid as that if they were really thinking about it? They were deficient in the skill of self-talk. They never got to inhibit their behavior long enough to talk themselves through it. If you can't talk yourself through an issue, it makes you a really poor problem solver. And you can make some really poor decisions. Working memory. Working memory is what you can juggle electronically in your brain at any given time. So you have a decision to make. Should I do my study for my SATs, or should I play Nintendo? Well, let's see. If I play Nintendo, it's fun, it's good, and I can get that extra bonus point that I've been working for. Okay, but that's the good part about playing with Nintendo. But if the bad part about it is that I'm going to fail my SATs, and all the hard work I've done is going to be blown out the window. Now, what was the good part again about it? Okay, you got to juggle all this stuff in mind. And kids who have ADHD have trouble with working memory. By the time they've forgotten one part of the reasoning, by the time they've thought about the second part of the reasoning, they've forgotten the first part. It's really weird. That's not normal. Well, that's why we call it a condition and diagnose it as ADHD. Initiation. My son, who is now 25 and just finished his 7th year of college and got his degree with ADD, calls me up and says, "Daddy, I'm in trouble." Well, why? What happened? Well, I have paper due tomorrow. Yeah, didn't we talk about this 2 weeks ago? And then you said you're going to go to the library? Yeah, I did. But, Daddy, when I go to the library 2 weeks in advance, nothing happens. So I said, I'm really glad it works for you, Daddy. I'm really proud of you. Okay, I'm glad it worked for you when you were in college. But I'm not going to the library 2 weeks in advance because it's not a very bright light, was what we worked out. A paper due in 2 weeks. And he depends upon the deadline to get himself to become a bright light. Paper due tomorrow is a much brighter light. Now, you may not have left yourself enough time to write a good paper, and you certainly haven't left yourself enough time to put it away for 2 days and come back to it with a fresh set of eyes. But some kids with ADD depend upon the brightness of the glass light. But that wasn't enough for him. So what did you do all day? What did he say? I don't know. Did you have fun doing? I don't know, not really. He had trouble with the executive function of initiation. And those of you with ADHD recognize that. Getting started. And it's been said if you're having trouble getting started, the first step is too big. Make a smaller step. I'm just going to write the first sentence to the introduction to one lab. I know I'm 3 labs behind, but I'm just going to write the first sentence, and then we'll see what happens. Chunk it. Okay. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, after a second or so, nothing continued to happen. Foresight, we already talked about that. So, hindsight, the ability to recall the past mistakes. It's another executive function. People with ADHD can't remember, they don't stop long enough to utilize their hindsight, even if they have it. The last 400 times I left the paper to the last 2 days, it was a disaster. They stayed up all night, they burnt themselves out. But this next paper, still going to happen again, okay? So ADHD, people have trouble learning from their mistakes. They have a poor sense of time, okay? Things seem too fast or too slow. And when your mother is lecturing to you, I've already heard this, Mother. I know what you're going to say. Hello, I got to go. Okay. So time is going much too slowly for some kids, much too fast for some kids, and a poor estimate of time. By the way, we talked much about short attention span. It's not about short attention span. It's about this whole executive function issues of getting things accomplished, making goals and accomplishing them. One of the things you have to do is focus. Okay, that's true too. Shifting agenda. So my son is doing homework, physics homework. My wife calls him down to dinner. Now it's a special dinner because God forbid he eats what everyone else is eating. So we set this up. Mark, honey, come on down for dinner. No, leave me alone. Go to. It's being videotaped, so I have to. Many people call that oppositional defiant disorder. No, go to H. Okay. But what were we asking him to do? We were asking him to leave an unpleasant task, doing your homework, and replace that with a presumably pleasant task, having your favorite meal. And he couldn't even do that because he had trouble with the executive function of transitioning, shifting agenda. Okay? And this is a big source of otherwise inexplicable blow-ups. Many kids who have ADHD also have trouble with arguing with adults, accepting blame, acting touchy, swearing, lying. That's not part of ADD, but it's commonly seen in a lot of kids. So the child who has ADD, who won't accept his blame, it's the professor's fault. She only put it on the website once. She didn't remind me every week that it's all the professor's fault, it's not my fault. Okay? Which really annoys the authorities, because now the kid not only is messed up, but they won't accept their results. They're lazy. They're viewed as not caring, not taking responsibility, not maturing. No, it's just that's what commonly see with kids who have ADHD. All right. We only have time just to mention them. But many kids who have ADHD have one of these other conditions, learning disability, and an organizational problem is not actually a defined learning disability, but I define a learning disability as a skill that isn't as good as your other skills. And being organized is by definition almost, a skill that ADHD kids are not good at. and some of them work at it really hard. Say, I have my BlackBerry and my Blueberry and my iPod and my iPad, and I write everything down, and I post-it notes. That child's working really hard, God bless them, but that doesn't mean they don't have an organizational disability. They just learn to overcome it. OCD, tics, depression, bipolar depression, Asperger's, and sensory integration. And these not just rarely occurring. Almost half the kids who have ADHD have some sort of learning disability. 20% or so have an anxiety problem, and so on. These are very common. At least 2/3 of kids who have ADHD have one other thing going on. 1/3 have two other things going on. 1 out of 6, 1 out of 5 have at least 3 other things going on. So they have ADD, plus Asperger's, plus a learning disability, plus an anxiety disorder. And they didn't ask to have any of this. And they're struggling through it just because that's what they got to do. And then we're yelling at them because they're not doing a good enough job. And then finally, the child has to deal with the family problems, okay? The child who has ADHD may have an ADHD father or mother, okay? If you have ADHD, you have a 40% chance that one of your parents has ADHD. And that ADHD parent or anxious parent or OCD parent or Asperger's parent, okay, may be ill-equipped to deal with a special needs child. Plus, the child has caused stress into the environment. And now the mom, who is biologically normal, now finds herself stressed out. And the last thing the child needs to do is to deal with a stressed out mother. So you have two people who are stressed out going into the homework scene. Now true, the mom's only stressed out because of the child, but it's yet one more difficulty that the child has to live with. So Larson, who did The Far Side, I presume must have had ADHD, based on this cartoon which he found in his closet that he had drawn when he was a child. It says, I remember quite fondly the games my mother used to play with me when I was growing up, such as one of my favorites shown here, where she'd hide cookies from me and then give me hints where I might find them. Well, all this doesn't necessarily lead to always a pretty picture. There are other issues that are going on. Some of it's biological and some of it's because life's not going as well as a kid would like. But ADHD people are very high risk for substance abuse, okay? About 1.5 times risk of the general population. Alcohol, drugs, cigarettes. Cigarettes are a big risk factor for future substance problems in ADD people especially. So as a goal, as a community, we really want to stop cigarette smoking back in 5th grade when it's really starting. ADHD medication use, the stimulants, okay, it is certainly possible to abuse stimulant medication. It is possible. You can make the front page of the New York Times if you do it. And there are warnings about abuse potential of stimulant medications. It is possible and it is a real risk. However, population studies show the kids who have ADHD who are on stimulants are at the same or lower risk for substance abuse as a population than kids with ADHD who are not treated with stimulants. It seems that it's not worsening their future risk, and it may actually be lowering it significantly. The data is a little bit conflicting, but it does not seem to increase future risk. Not to say that you can't get abuse it. Speaking of abuse, there's misuse and diversion, which I always want to make sure our college campus kids are aware of. It is a federal felony to even give, not necessarily sell, to even give for free a stimulant medicine to a peer. That's practicing medicine that's distributing a controlled substance without a license. It is a federal felony to even give it. Diversion is a huge problem, as we'll see. Is about 30% of kids have been asked. What's the easiest way not to be asked for your medication? Don't tell anybody. Yes, you guys are good. Okay. All right. It sounds stupid, but it's really hard. Your best friend comes up and says, listen, I'm on probation. My parents said if I don't keep up at least the average, I'm out of here, and I'm going to lose my scholarship. And come on, you got a whole bottle there. What's the big deal? It's hard to say no. You will say no, okay? But don't put yourself in that situation. %11 of adult ADD people are young entrepreneurs and actually sell their medication, which is particularly vile. So what about the going away? 1/3 of kids will remit by age 25. the frontal lobes continue to grow into the mid-20s, and a little bit into further on. That's why we don't try juveniles as adults, because we don't expect them to have the same frontal lobe foresight function and self-control. 2/3 will meet at least partial criteria, though, but they'll make some progress. The hyperactivity and impulsivity tend to resolve. We'll talk about that in a moment. So this is just how some of the symptoms change as they go on. The inattentive part starts from leaving activities incomplete and not listening symptoms, through disorganized and distracted environments, through adults not completing details, not doing the final pieces of work on your paper, getting to hand it in, missed appointments, lack of foresight. The overactivity, the hyperactivity, goes from being motorically whirlwind to, as adults, subjective feeling of restlessness. I'm jumping out of my skin here. I can't take this anymore. The impulsivity goes from jumping off of couches and off of decks to reckless behavior in adolescence, to motor vehicle accidents, and poor decision making. So it used to be, since the physical hyperactivity almost always disappears, you don't see 60-year-old men jumping out of shopping carts. Okay, but the ADD went away, but it doesn't really for the majority of kids, completely at least. Okay, and then you have to always have the obligatory positive things. There are obviously good things that come from ADHD as well. It's part of who the kid is, the young adult. It's part of what makes them them. They have an envious why not attitude. What's the worst that could happen? They're not even thinking about that. Okay. They live in the present. The rest of us are taking yoga courses and meditation courses to learn how to live in the present. They are smelling the roses. Fortunately, they're trying to drive a car at the same time. They can have extreme passion, they can be very creative, and they can be lots of fun. They seem to be a particularly good match for OCD girls. Okay, because the OCD girl, all of a sudden now she's taking some risks and having some fun with her life. Hopefully it will continue to be a good match. All right, so classic ADD is just the tip of the iceberg. There's the classically defined ADHD, short attention span, hyperactivity, impulsivity. That's the last time we've mentioned the word short attention span. Okay, then the other executive dysfunctions, working memory, inhibition, foresight, hindsight, shifting agenda, co-occurring problems, family stresses that they either caused or were born into. And then, so all right, he's got the diagnosis of ADHD, he's hyper, he's got short attention span. But why does he also? Well, it took us half an hour just to name the problems that a kid with ADHD has to live with. Just to name them. So some solutions. Rule number 1, keep it positive. You have to show acceptance to the child. Okay, acceptance to yourself. People beat themselves up awfully badly. I screwed up again. I hate myself. I'm such a bum. You wouldn't treat anyone else like that. So why should we treat ourselves like that? Okay, forgive yourself every night and move on. Ed Hallowell, who's in some people's view is a little Pollyannic about ADHD, has a couple really nice quotes. These are the kids who need you or love the most because they get it elsewhere the least. A parent ought to be a child's first and greatest fan. It may not be easy at some point, but find something to praise. Hang in there. It can take decades before the results show. This is the 50-year plan. Works in progress. It's the journey. Okay. Another thing that Hallowell likes to do is to focus on the mirror traits. So if you can do this, God bless you. Okay. He's not distractible, he's curious. He's not impulsive, he's creative. He's not hyper, he's energetic. He's not intrusive, he's eager. She's not forgetful, she's really into what she's doing. He's not disorganized, he's spontaneous. He's not stubborn, he's persistent, it won't give up. He's not inconsistent, he has flashes of brilliance. He's not moody, he's sensitive. So everything can be reframed if you keep it in a positive light. Don't forget to do things that you're good at, okay? We spend all this time getting remediation for the things that we're having trouble with so we can build our self-esteem by overcoming our problems. But how about we spend some time strengthening the skills that we're actually naturally good at, which come a whole lot easier to get self-esteem. So that concept has been called remediating the strength. And I'm going to steal one of Melissa's lines. She has a poster that shows, how come they only give me stickers for doing things that I'm not good at? Tom Fallon has 4 cardinal sins in his book, Surviving Your Adolescence. That's you guys, not your own adolescence. Okay. Don't nag. It hasn't worked yet. If you're being asked by a parent to clean up your room 400 times hasn't worked. The 401st nag isn't likely to work either. Don't lecture. It's not going to work either. Insight transplants don't work. So you're trying to you come inside, your child's playing Nintendo, or you're playing Nintendo, and your mom calls you up and says, don't forget you have a paper due in 2 weeks. An insight transplant. Not likely to change the effect of that paper done when the advice is given in the middle of a video game. Don't argue. It takes 180 to get to start an argument. It takes 2 to continue it. And if it's not useful, don't do it. A nice traffic cop. You can use this with your parents the next time they try to come down heavy on you. We don't accept nastiness from people with authority. If we got a ticket, we were pulled over and get a ticket from a cop, we wouldn't accept him to be nasty at the same time. And we wouldn't expect him to say, and look at your car, it's a mess. When's the last time you washed this thing? Okay. So we don't expect, as adults, we don't accept nasty attitudes when authority positions hand out punishments. Why should our children be any happier to have it? So the punishment speaks for itself. You ought to drop out of college. That's enough. Speaks for itself. Certainly doesn't need the nasty attitude to go along with it. The no-fault approach. We just saw the kids with ADHD have trouble accepting blame for their problems. And so Chris Ziegler-Denley has this approach. Child comes home, he's got an 11 o'clock curfew, and comes home at 12 o'clock. I'm sorry, Mom, but while I was about to leave the house at 10:30 to come home, Jill's sister had a febrile seizure. And the ambulance was out of commission, so they asked me to drive her to the hospital. When we were there, somebody was having a heart attack, and the ambulance still wasn't working, so they asked me to bring the guy to Westchester. On the way home, we were out of gas, and you said never come home with less than half a tank of gas. So we had to stop for gas, and while we were there, we had to stop in and get milk for Jill's little sister because she was starving. So I'm sorry I'm late. It's an hour and a half late. I should have called, I know, but I'm sorry. But which life wasn't I supposed to save? Don't enter the arena. The rule was you're supposed to be home at 11. It's now 12:30. Here's your punishment. It's minor because the punishments don't change behavior anyway. Okay, if you don't have the basic skills to comply with the punishment next time. And there's your punishment. No Nintendo tomorrow. Let's go have ice cream. We eat a lot of ice cream in my house. A lot of this is just normal, and hopefully some of this will ring true in your own lives. This is what the child thinks about mom, what mom knows from the child's perspective. And you notice that from birth to about 8, mom knows everything. Then suddenly between 8 and 12, mom gets incredibly stupid and now knows less than nothing. And then I've enjoyed this with my 2 children. When they come home from Thanksgiving break in their freshman year, they discover their parents have learned a fair amount while they've been gone. They actually listen to my advice. They don't take it, but they listen to it and they ask for it. I've been told that I have less time than I thought, which is why you can buy the books. Rule 2 is keep it calm. So this is a typical set of directives that I've been talking to my son with while he's trying to do his homework. Your room's a mess. Clean it up. You'll never get into college. Get your essays done. You didn't take out the dog. You didn't do the laundry. And the child is already struggling trying to get through his homework, saying, being yelled at doesn't help me think more clearly. So rule 2 is just stop. We talked about ADHD has trouble with stopping, with inhibiting behavior, put on the brakes. Okay? So what we need to do is to be calming influences, not inflaming influences. This actually, I forget which animal this is, but this is a study where they gave a dopamine 1 agonist. And they checked the working memory of the rodent. And a little bit of dopamine, like a little bit of stress, actually increases working memory. If you stress out the animal too much, and we're animals, okay, you'll actually cut off executive function. So this applies to any human interaction. If you want people to think clearly, and most of the time when we're arguing about something, it's pretty obvious what the correct answer is, that they're stuck in their old mode. If you want them to think clearly, you have to let them have their executive function come back on. You have to let them calm down. So anytime you're having a fight with your child, your parent, your friend, you want to be a diffusing influence, not an inflaming influence. Child complains he doesn't want to do his homework, you start screaming, getting into a screaming match. It's going to make it harder for him to figure out that that he's got to do it. Okay, so you want to diffuse, don't inflame, lower your voice, stay calm, state the rule once, leave, and ignore the ruminations of a blob of neurons that happens to have your last name. Discussion will resume later when it can be useful. You're not giving in. So when you say, honey, we need to take a 5-minute break here, and we're going to talk about my mother-in-law soon, okay? That's not saying, you're right, we're never going to see her again. You're just saying, we're going to calm down here and talk about it in 10 minutes when we all can think clearly. And this applies both to the child who has the person who has the executive function problems and to the neurotypical. Everyone needs to be calm when you enter a negotiation. Ross Greene has a wonderful book called The Explosive Child, okay, where he lays out this in a 3-step process. Basically, it's negotiating. And here we're finally teaching a child a skill, okay? Stop, and let's talk about this. Step 1 is the child states his problem. You don't ever let me play video games. The usual adult response is, that's not true. You play 2 hours a day, your sister only got to play 1 hour a day, and I had to carry a hot potato to school to keep my hands warm. And you're complaining that you don't have enough video time. Blown out of the water before the discussion even starts. Dismissed totally. Why should this child ever try to discuss anything rationally with his parents again? So step 1 is the child states their problem, is invited to state their problem. And step 2 is the adult says, or the partner, I hear you. If they're younger, you can say, oh, so you don't think I want to play enough you get to play enough video games. If you do that with too old a person, they're going to say, you're just doing that psychobabble. Okay? So just say, I hear you. I didn't agree with you. I just say, I hear you. It's a feeling that I need to recognize and deal with. Step 2 is the adult states her problem. Well, when you play video games to stay up too late, it means your sister the next morning because you don't have enough sleep. And step 3 is the child is invited to throw out possible solutions. And the person who's in control of the situation, the adult, okay, gets to decide which solution works. And the child's invited to do a win-win solution, to negotiate. A lot of fathers and parents have trouble with negotiating with an 8-year-old. Well, do it when I was at his age, my father said yes, and I said boo, or the other way around. Okay. God bless that child. You didn't have that. Okay. So what's wrong with teaching the next generation how to seek win-win solutions and how to negotiate? Is there anything wrong with teaching that skill? Okay, so after all, it's a win-win. It's not a he wins and you lose that we're teaching him. One more time, your ADHD child is much more likely to be overwhelmed than evil. They would do well if they could. Ross Greene. Children do well when they can. College students do well when they can. Evil behaviors need to be squashed. Overwhelmed behaviors need to be calmly diffused. Rule 3 is keep it organized. Douglas Adams has a comment. I love deadlines. I love the whooshing sound they make as they pass by. We don't have time. Buy the book, Organizing the Disorganized Child. It works for college students as well. But the main thing that you need to do is to have a planner. And not only have a planner, but use it. Okay? A monthly planner is really the best because it shows people with ADHD have trouble with the concept of time. And they don't see things bunching up. So if you just write down in the syllabus, papers due on March 15th, and another syllabus says midterm is on March 17th, and they're separate pieces of paper, no one can realize that they're bunched up together, and we better just get that paper now done in February, because March they're all bunched up. So put things in a big calendar, a big wall calendar. Timeanddate.com has free printable calendars. Rule 4 is keep it going. You need, if you're in college, and you have ADHD, you really need a coach. Okay? You may make it without a coach, but you may not. And you're losing your mother's nagging at the same time as the professors pull way back. Now eventually, you're going to get a wife, a girlfriend, or a secretary, hopefully not all at the same time, who will play the role of what your mother used to do. And if you're smart, you'll accept the help from the women. So I like to view this as being the safety net, not a crutch, but a safety net. Okay, and then very briefly just about the medications. The medications are part of the treatment for ADD. They're not the whole treatment. They're not always necessary. Organizational skills may work. But stimulants, remember we said ADD is too little norepinephrine and dopamine. And the stimulants raise the norepinephrine and dopamine levels. And if you raise the dopamine and norepinephrine levels, you can pay attention, stop paying attention to the bird. So I like to use the analogy of it's giving the bicycle brakes. ADHD people are bicycles without brakes. What we're doing is waking up the brakes. Secretaries who have, it's like coffee. Secretaries who have coffee sit down, stop chatting, and quietly begin typing because they're awake, not because they're too tired to chat anymore. They don't say, Jill, I just had coffee. I'm too tired to chat. I'm just going to sit here and type quietly if you don't mind, because I'm so tired from that coffee that I have no energy left to do anything except type. No, I'm awake. I'm alert. Let's do it. Driving and stimulant medication. If you have ADHD, the rule of thumb should be don't leave home without it. Okay? ADHD people are at a much higher risk for driving accidents and license suspensions. And some simulator studies show that stimulant medications, the kids who have ADHD, reduce their risk of driving accidents by 2/3 if they're on stimulants at the time. We can skip these. And we'll end with a pop quiz about executive function. So this is a 13-year-old son who just finished his 7th year of college. But a true story. A 13-year-old with ADHD discovers that his bite plate is missing from his handy container. He angrily accuses everyone else of having taken it. His mother explains the blatantly obvious fact that no one else would be interested in his used dental appliance. He continues screaming and blaming her for its absence. Question 1, all together now. This child is demonstrating good executive function. You guys are good. Question 2, the accusatory behavior of this otherwise bright child can be best explained by A, he's still not quite smart enough to comprehend that his bite plate isn't worth stealing, or B, he's overwhelmed by frustration. I mean, think about it. What could make a child who's otherwise smart think that someone else would really want his bite plate? Question 3, yelling back and accusing your child of behaving horribly would A, prompt him to say, oh, thanks for helping me see the error of my ways, or B, cause him to be even further overwhelmed. Okay, now thank you for laughing. We've been talking for 45 minutes, and I can tell that the fact that you all laughed, that you're still paying attention, so I'm glad you laughed, and you're supposed to laugh. Okay, but think about what just happened. In a calm moment like now, the thought that yelling at a person who's out of control and not thinking clearly would actually be helpful is such a ridiculous idea that we break into spontaneous laughter at the thought of it. Guess what I'm going to do with my family when I get home tonight? An initial attempt at helping him solve the problems unsuccessfully. Look under the bed, you look in the dog's bed. Okay, a useful parental response at this point would be A, keep escalating the screaming match, or B, and you guys are all successful students, so you know it's always the longest answer in multiple choice. Okay. Stop, walk away, retain your composure, and resist the urge to get into the last word. Resume discussion when everyone is calm. Question 5. This type of outrageous behavior in an ADHD child is A, a common part of the breakless behaviors we summarize with the letters ADHD, or as a result of a nasty and selfish child. Okay. So in conclusion, this is the 50-year plan. Have some fun. The winner is the family and classroom that stays together. Enjoy the ride. And I have offices all around town. And my website is syndromemix.com. It's an ADHD ebook, which has all this information online for free. Okay, thank you guys very much.
We're going to open it up for questions after you
Okay.
respond.
Yeah,
So
fine.
Larry said you're going to stick around.
Okay, sure.
Great, okay. All right, what we're going to do now is have our panel of experts respond to some of the points that were made by Dr. Kutcher, and then we'll open it up to questions. So I'd like to introduce our panel. Melissa Smith will be speaking about ADHD in childhood. Christina Kramer will be speaking about ADHD in adolescence, and Dr. Geraldine Abatiello will be speaking about ADHD in adulthood. So, Melissa, you want to start?
Oh, right. Am I coming up there?
If you want to be heard, I think, yeah.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. I'm electronically challenged. Oh, okay, that's fine. That's good. Yeah, that's
Okay. Some of our students need to leave because of classroom time.
Yep, that's
Okay?
fine.
So if we keep it like 5-6 minutes each, somewhere around there.
Okay, that's fine.
Where's the mouse?
All right, so yours is coming, that's yours, right?
All right, so listen, if you could stay with us, because the program is not over. If you have to go, then we ask you to go, but we'd like to move on with the second part of Part B of the program. And with that, what I'd like to do is have our first expert addressing the issue of reacting
Yeah.
to the theme of childhood.
Right there?
No. Oops. It's my thingy.
Hold on.
All right, so why don't you start, and I'll help you with the
Okay, that's
the IT.
fine.
So you're gonna, why don't you stand over here, because
Which
you're
one
gonna
is
use
it?
the microphone.
ADHD St. Mary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it? Beautiful.
Okay. What do I click?
I'll bring this up.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Melissa Smith, and I live in Pleasant Valley. I've been a guidance counselor for 15 years. But more importantly, I have an 8-year-old son who has ADHD, and I have an ex-husband of 23 years who has ADHD. And my colleagues would probably tell you I have ADHD. However, it's not diagnosed, and I sort of am always uncomfortable saying that because it is a serious condition, and there's often a lot of jokes about having ADHD. So I just preface that, but I usually am the most disorganized and chewing my gum and needing to move around type person. So let's see if I can figure this out. It's interesting. I realized today I'm actually finding that my life is becoming my presentation, and on some level it's somewhat sad. I got a phone call from my 8-year-old son's school today saying that he was ill and he had actually thrown up, and could I come and get him? So I rushed up to Taconic to go and pick him up, get to the nurse's office, and there were several kids in there that were ill. And as the parents came in, I would watch the nurse and say, oh, you know, she was so sick, you know, take her home, and be all nurturing and kind. So I go over to get Jacob, and she tells me, well, he did throw up, but, you know, he's been moving around a lot. And then the two lunch ladies chime in, yeah, I don't think he's really sick. He hasn't sat still. So I just looked at them and I said, listen, he's had 103 temperatures and he's been moving around. So, you know, it just is indicative of the lack of knowledge and information. And I somewhat am embarrassed of the system that I've worked in for 15 years because the lack of understanding is very prevalent. And we have to really push to get the graduate programs. That's why I'm so happy all these students are here, the undergrad and graduate programs, to learn about ADHD. Because for these little kids, it sets them up to feel so poorly about themselves. So these are just some of the comments that, you know, I've heard about my son. You know, he's just a boy, he'll grow out of it. Or all kids with ADHD are hyperactive. You know, the big one is he needs more discipline. I've also heard you negotiate too much with him. I also explain to parents who are very afraid of the stigma piece, if you're seeing these behaviors, let's at least start there and let's address these behaviors in the classroom. When, like Dr. Kutcher said, the teacher or the parent come to them. People are so afraid of the stigma. Actually I shouldn't even say it was a dilemma. My son it's very obvious he has ADHD. He's nonstop talking, nonstop moving. We have pushed open emergency doors at Lowe's and Home Depot. Yes, quite embarrassing, but there was the bright light, the red door. He was like right over to it before I could grab him, and the alarms are going off. And this was on medication as well. So I just thought this little cartoon was kind of cute because it really does, by the time I think about what I'm going to do, I've already done it. All right. people would ask me, your son is 4 years old. How do you know he has ADHD? 4-year-olds are all over the place. They can't focus. They knock things over. They have trouble with their peers. This is what I really live by. If these symptoms are persistent, pervasive, and excessive, it's something to think about. And if it's happening in all realms of their life, not just at school, not just at home, not just at soccer, not just at church, if you're seeing these behaviors in many facets of the child's life, look into it. It's tragic what I see on the high school level, and Chrissy will address that, these kids that struggle their whole school career without this being addressed and thinking something is really wrong with them, which, as Dr. Kutcher said, they can't put on their brakes, And if we can address this at a young age, and that's what I've been doing with my son, instead of having him feel like this, I think there's a chance for him. These are just some sad faces because, that's what we see. My son has been excluded from birthday parties. He was labeled because in 2nd grade, the school decided to use a reflection pond as a glorified timeout, and it was just a corner of the room where Jacob was sent every day for impulsive acts, getting out of his seat, maybe blurting out. Never did he get written up for anything really bad, but then you guys all know what happens. The kids go home, they tell their parents, and then Jacob gets labeled the bad boy. So we're at Boy Scouts, I hear parents mumbling, he doesn't get invited to birthday parties. So I started off on a mission, created a community coalition called ADHD, A New Vision Through a New Light, to kind of address this little cartoon. So take 1 second and look at it. And again, it's so great that all you students are here because hopefully you'll think of this. This is Ross Green also. He gave me permission to use his slides. We have to stop and think of what we're really doing to these families and pull from resources and realize that they didn't choose to be born with this. This is crazy. I'm not going to go into it because we're a little rushed, but the school system for parents, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, foreign language. Foreign language. When the kids, are in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade, and you do get them classified or a 504 plan, there's many strategies that can be used in the classroom. Everyone teases me, but I travel with this chair. This chair has saved my son's life as far as homework goes. It's the yoga ball chair, $80. They're not letting him use it in school yet, but he can sit on it. It allows for motion. And believe it or not, this fidgeting and this motion is needed for them to give them sort of a boost to learn. I had to fight to allow for him to chew gum. That's another strategy that we use. Chewing gum is sort of a passive stimulation, and it's non-intrusive to the other students in the class. So that's another good one. Fidgeting. You can teach the kids how to use stress balls. You can put bungees on the base of their chair so they can wiggle on their feet. Someone tell me, what is wrong with having to stand in the back of the classroom to learn? I don't know, I haven't figured that out yet, but the schools give you a hard time on that one. This one too, for parents of the small guys. It is very hard, and I'm not gonna say I haven't had my mommy dearest moments. It is very hard, that being so persistent, my son is extremely persistent. But if something's not working, don't keep doing it. And that's the frustration because, we figure out a strategy and it works for so long and then I gotta come up with something else. But I'm in it with him for the long haul, and I am his safety net because these kids really have no other safety nets. And whatever it takes, if I have to paint numbers on rocks outside and we have to do his math running around the yard looking for those rocks with the numbers on it, that's what we're gonna do. Oh, just really quick on this. I had to also fight with the school not to take recess away. That's complete insanity. These little guys need to get their energy out and it will actually make the day worse for them. So let's think of another more natural consequence to help modify the behavior. Connectiveness. I think it's Dr. Robert Brooks wrote a lot about the resilient child, and that's what I'm trying to work on over in Dutchess County and in the school that I work in, to develop programs. These kids, there's so much failure in their lives. So I've also found, my son is 8 years old. He volunteers. We take in foster dogs. He's feeling good. He doesn't feel like he's broken. He's doing something good for the community. Sports are very important. Gail and I, my partner over there, we are starting the first ADHD camp at Gold's Gym. It's It's gonna be very affordable for parents. It's a trial run, but we're hoping to make this fly because all the private camps out there are so expensive. And there's very few. The one at College in New Rochelle, run through NYU, and then there's another one, Camp Huntington, but they're extremely expensive. Probably for me as a parent with an 8-year-old, the most heartbreaking thing is really not getting invited to the birthday parties and not having many play dates. Now my son, if you met him, he would love all of you. He loves adults, and he would talk very appropriately and respectful, and you probably wouldn't even realize he has ADHD. But put him in a room with other 8-year-olds and we have a disaster. You know, he doesn't read their social cues, he's in their business, he doesn't stop talking, he wants to be first, and it's very challenging. I did that already. Let's see. Oh, the positives. Michael Phelps, that's my son's idol. Michael Phelps has ADHD. The Wright brothers, Henry Ford, Bill Clinton, Whoopi Goldberg, a lot of successful people. And I really feel this is what our school system is doing, and I am a part of it. I'm trying to change it. But if we can find how these kids shine and the strengths they have and think outside the box, and parents, the parents in here, you write a letter and you have a meeting with the principal and your school team before that kid starts school every single year, okay? And you identify, this is what you might see in my child. They might fidget, they might blurt out, but here's some suggestions. And you have to be relentless. I know they can't stand me when I call, but that's too bad. This is my son's life, and this is his future, and I don't want him to wind up a statistic. I'll end on that. Okay, thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Kramer, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit from the adolescent point of view. I'm just getting my PowerPoint set up, so just hold on one second. Okay, so as I said, my name is Christina Kramer, and I work with Melissa in the Lakeland Central School District as a high school. Oh, that's not supposed to happen.
You said it's a slide.
Hold on. Pause. I guess I'll just pause it there for now. So my philosophy working with kids is displayed by some of the posters in my room up there. I'm a special education teacher, and I currently work with in self-contained classrooms. So I have no more than 12 or 13 kids at a time. And most of my students, if not all of them, have ADHD. So in addition, I've also worked as a collab teacher in a mainstream classroom where maybe only 1 or 2 kids would have ADHD. But predominantly I work with groups of kids that all have it. But in addition, I have worked privately with kids, one-on-one tutoring, and also parent and family coaching and training with students that have not only ADHD but other behavioral disorders that Dr. Kutcher spoke about. The main thing, I'm going to see if this will go to the next slide. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so the main thing I wanted to talk about today is just a few tips, like Melissa had hinted, and there we go. I don't know why this is happening. I apologize. Hold on. Okay, so I'm just gonna pause on there. Okay, so the main things that I want to talk about for those of you who are students possibly going into the teaching field, or I know we have a lot of psychology students, so going into working with students and families, is to keep these 4 tips in mind. And Dr. Kutcher and Melissa both talked about these to a degree. A lot of people forget that high schoolers and middle schoolers and even college students still need these 4 things, just like Jacob. They need you to keep it interesting. They need you to make connections, use incentives, and be proactive. So just to talk about a few things for keep it interesting. Today, I'm going to talk about, I went into work late today. I had a doctor's appointment, so I was scheduled to go into work late. And I have one group of students that I see twice a day. So I guess the sub didn't tell them that I would be there for the second time. So of course they come in and they're like, oh my God, we thought we were gonna do nothing. We did nothing the first period. And you can see, even though I have, a positive rapport with my students, or I'd like to think so, just the idea that they were gonna do work and not be able to, as what I found out later, did absolutely nothing with the sub, was not too appealing to them. So when I say keep it interesting, they were saying, oh, I said, well, who is the sub? Because I would like to know who did nothing with you. And they said, she was a very nice lady. So I said, well, guess what? And I walked out of the room. There was one student in particular was really kind of acting out and not having a good day. So I walked out of the room and I came back in and I put on an accent and I said, hello everybody, I'm Mrs. Nice Lady. And I proceeded to do the entire class in that accent and voice, and they just got such a kick out of it, and we really weren't doing anything exciting or interesting, but just the fact that I was in that persona, I really was able to keep their attention. So a lot of you would be saying, how does that attract to 10th graders? But they loved it. And so, keeping things interesting, thinking outside the box is important. Another thing that, and also with going with keeping it interesting, is to constantly change up what you're doing. And Melissa talked about, going out into the yard with her son and having him paint blocks. And at the high school level, you have to do that too. There may be something that really works the first few weeks of class, or the first, few months even, maybe, if you're lucky, but it's gonna get old quick. So you've gotta constantly go into your box of tricks and change things up. And like what I did today was completely spontaneous, didn't plan it, but it kept it interesting for them. Making connections is extremely, extremely important with adolescents and young adults. Dr. Kutcher talked about how if things don't go well, he mentioned something really important. He said it's not the parent's fault that the child has ADHD, but the parents may certainly be a part of the outcome. That's true for anybody who works with someone with ADHD, whether it's the teacher or the psychologist or the friends or the peer group. So you may not be responsible for why it happened, but you certainly have a large role in helping the child's life to be positive and productive. So making connections is important because a lot of these kids feel really, really bad about themselves, and especially at the high school level, if they've been going through elementary school constantly being told, no, stop. By the time they get to high school, they are just done. And they automatically walk into the room getting ready to be yelled at and getting ready to be defensive. And so it can really be a very negative atmosphere. At the same time, as a teacher, even though I'm a special education teacher, I'm still responsible for all of these really intense regulations and region scores and everything. So you say, everything can't always be fun and outside the box. So one of the ways that I can reach my students is by making connections, going to their basketball games, going to their school plays. If I don't have time for that, or if the other teachers that work with me, we don't have time for that, show them that their name was in the newspaper for something for sports. Mention that you heard they did a great job in the orchestra performance. If you're going to get something at McDonald's, go a little bit out of the way to go to the McDonald's where one of your students has a job at. When you're able to make those positive connections with them, that also goes with being proactive. Then when you're asking them to do something really difficult or asking them to comply to a rule that's hard for them, they remember that you're also the person that was sitting in the stands watching their basketball game that maybe their dad couldn't go to, or something like that. Use incentives. Kids, middle schoolers, young adults, high schoolers, college students, and even us, we like incentives. There's a great spread of food out there. I'm sure a lot of people were more motivated to come and more motivated to come back to another conference because of that. So we can't forget that just because they're not, an 8-year-old, they still enjoy rewards. One of the things that I do, you'll see I have bingo up in the corner. I play classroom bingo with the students. Every time they do something positive, or sometimes I'll say, whoever gets the next question right, or whoever is in there helps out with putting the desks away, or something like that, I'll give them a bingo chip with their name on it, and they put it on the board. Once the board is filled up with names, I will randomly pull, B5 or C6, and whoever's name is on there gets a prize. And the prizes can be things that are tangible, like, glitter pens or $5 gift cards. But sometimes it can also be non-tangible things that high schoolers would like, such as, a no homework pass or a late to class pass, things like that. And you can also do these kinds of things at home, with having incentives and things that they would like and trying to think of privileges. And Dr. Kutcher said it perfectly that both discipline and positive reinforcement work, but only positive reinforcement really changes the attitude. They might both change the behavior, but positive reinforcement gets them to really want to do well for their parents or for their teachers, in addition to themselves. So I don't want to talk too much because I could talk forever, but what I do want to do is go to a slideshow that I'm going to try to go to. And I apologize that there we go, next. Okay, this is just, yeah, I got it. This is just my, my belief system of what ADHD stands for. And this, I'm gonna let you watch. It'll go by itself, and it does go to music. Is there volume on this? Let's see.
I don't know if they have the volume hooked up. Let me try. Volume. Can you sing
Well,
along? Can you sing along with it?
It didn't start. There we go.
Can you hear it?
Yeah, it's just background music, so it's cool. It's okay. It's okay. They can see it. Okay, so that was just a little bit about the adolescent. I'm going to let our next speaker talk about adulthood, and I look forward to questions later. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Avatiello, and I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner and a nurse, and I can hypnotize you all so that you won't know you've been here. I'm only kidding. I just have a few things to say. One of the things that we are talking about in terms of adult is that we very rarely get some of this positive feedback that you heard. Adult at a job who's inappropriate or doesn't do their work or can't work with the team is in trouble. All right, and you can't make money, and most people want to make some money. So we have this notion of how do we deal with some of these things, and I think Dr. Kutcher was really very good in bringing up the fact that people usually have other comorbid illnesses. So that, and part of that is because it's self-treatment. you live your whole life as a child or adolescent with the anxiety of not knowing what was going to happen or what was going to come out of your mouth. And then as an adult, it's still coming out of your mouth, only no one's telling you how you might adjust that. So in adulthood, when I'm making a kind of an assessment of people, I'm very interested to find out how they have self-treated. You know, what drugs, what alcohol, and do they have other kinds of illnesses like anxiety? Are they sleeping? Are they eating too much or eating too little? So, you know, it's sort of what we do in nursing kind of thing. But one of the things that I think what you're hearing here is that there's ways that we can learn how to chunk information, how to focus, how to adjust. But the idea that this kind of warm fuzzy, which I think is a wonderful thing to help people do, we forget as adults. And so what we're hearing when people come to my office and tell me they're having trouble paying attention or being impulsive at work, not completing their work, nobody likes them at work, because they show up for meetings and everything, their 5 bags are all over the desk, and then they leave before they tell you why they're here. And so it's important to recognize that people bring this into adulthood with them. And you know, they can be creative and funny, and they could be engaging at the same time as disconnected and dysfunctional. Who did this? Why isn't this done? It's not my fault. We have, you know, a star ADD person in my office who, they actually bought a present that said it wasn't my fault. You know, well, if you live your whole life, you know, always being told it's your fault, it's very hard to undo that. So part of what we do for adults is to help them begin to think about what it is that they're doing, and even just to recognize the level of anxiety that you have getting through a day, looking at what kind of things get in the way of you actually completing your job. You know, I'm quite convinced there are faculty that have many kinds of illnesses teaching. Having been faculty, I can tell you that there are lots of different things, and what we want to do is, like, you know, who's in the audience is how you want to deal with the students, and sometimes it's a good match and sometimes it's not such a good match. So helping people be prepared, helping them chunk information, helping them identify that they really have to watch what it is that their thoughts are coming up with, so that you can, like, hear, I'm stupid, I can't do this, I'm never going to get this, it's not my fault, all sorts of kind of poor coping skills that they bring into adulthood, no longer needing a teacher, a colleague, or they can now play this tape without help. So that anytime something goes wrong, their tape about how stupid they are, how disorganized they are, how they're never going to get anywhere in their job, and sometimes that's true. But the idea that we can do some things to help people, we can give them some basic skills, as well as some medication. As you get older, your neurotransmitters aren't quite as up to snuff, and there are some changes. The other thing that I see in practice is when people have a lot of head injuries, their behaviors actually mimic these kinds of conditions, whether it mimics what bipolar is, it may mimic anxiety, it may mimic ADHD, or it all kind of goes in the same process. So it's very important to get somebody who's going to help you understand what's happening. And also that you recognize that there are some times that these are because you, I don't know if you have anybody ever seen this, but you know the cartoon for Peanuts, the one where the things are all flying in the air? What's the name of that character in Peanuts? Pigpen. all right? I mean, when you see Pigpen, all of the things are flying in the air, and that's the life of somebody who's an adult ADHD. You know, they've got so many things, and they have a lot of interest. They're usually pretty smart. They're all over the darn place, and it's very hard to get them, you know, to get back here. So sometimes medications can be helpful. Certain kinds of cognitive behavioral therapy with techniques are helpful. Sometimes having them begin to stop giving that message, even to listen to the message that they're giving themselves, needs to be corrected. All right, and I have a little simple example of this. I teach nurses who are a wonderful group of people, and they come in the morning to learn. And I teach pain and palliative care. How can they make their patient's life easier? Now, they have two things that problems. Patients who can't listen to them, all right, and they may already have ADHD themselves, so they're sitting at a patient's house, working with their computers, doing their smartphone, answering the phone, and their patient's got the televisions going on, starting to say about, you know, every part of their body that hurts, and they can't filter it all through. So this notion of not having a filter is really tough. So they have to really plan before they go. But one of the things that I hear a lot is, I can't take a test. Now, anybody who got through college and nursing school can take a test, but it's a skill that we kind of forget. And so one of the things that is helping them is just to look and be really calm and peaceful for one moment, just one, while they're reading the question, while they're listening to the patient, while they're at their job, trying to work with a team. And I thought you made a good point when you brought up that the mates of ADHD and OCD work really well, because one of the things that I might tell a patient to do is find somebody who's OCD to work with them. All right, and everybody knows who they are because they've got it on their agenda, they have the plan, they've got the schedule, they even have some suggestions. And the person with ADHD comes in and is like, what's the purpose of this meeting? You know, oh, I didn't bring my book. You know, so it's very helpful if we can get people to link. Two people with ADHD in the same room is not gonna work. So, you know, we wanna help them look at who you're gonna work with, how you're gonna do your work, and begin to use these skills on a pretty regular basis. And so one of the things I invite people to do is to really exert some discipline of their own on their thinking, and just to be able to give themselves the message, you got through this, you know, because in a job, you're not going to get all of those positive reinforcements, so we have to have people be able to give it themselves. And finally, there was one piece of information that I found very helpful in a job setting, and that was, people do not listen to any correction until you have given them 3 to 5 positive statements. So when we're trying to help people, we have to recognize they first have to hear, wow, nice sweater today. Well, you know, I really like the way you talk to that person. And I'm thinking the fact that you got here on time means that it's very important for us to start on time. Now let me explain one other problem before we go, and then you tell them what the problem is, so that they have some sense that they're getting positive feedback, positive reinforcement, and that they learn how to do it themselves. Because adults have to listen to what tape is going on, what radio station's playing, and then tune it into that one, even if it's only for 5 minutes at a time. So, thank you.